the housekeeping supervisor at the Burj Tower Hotel, had worked in Dubai's luxury hospitality industry for 17 years. Saira al-Hakim had seen everything, or so she thought. When she knocked on the door of room 1847 that Thursday morning at 7:30, the silence that greeted her felt different somehow. Heavy. Final. She used her keycard. The door swung open to reveal a scene that would later be described in police reports as peaceful, almost romantic. Rose petals scattered across Egyptian cotton sheets. 2 champagne glasses on the nightstand, one still half full. The curtains drawn against the March sunlight, leaving the room in amber twilight. And on the bed, a young woman who appeared to be sleeping, except for the unnatural stillness of her chest and the way her eyes stared at nothing. Saira's scream echoed down the hallway of the 14th floor. March 15, 2024. By the time Dubai police arrived at 7:47 a.m., the story had already begun to write itself. Foreign worker, expired visa, apparent overdose, suicide note in careful handwriting. The diamond bracelet on her wrist caught the investigators' attention. Too expensive for someone living on a dancer's salary, but not enough to contradict the obvious narrative. Another tragic OFW who couldn't handle the pressure. Another statistic in a city built by hands that would never be memorialized. But this story didn't begin that Thursday morning. It began 10 months earlier with a man who had everything and felt nothing, and a woman who had nothing and felt everything. Sheikh Rami Al-Muhari sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Al-Muhari Towers, staring at the spreadsheet on his laptop without really seeing it. The numbers were good, they were always good. His luxury hotel chain had expanded to 7 properties across the Emirates, with an 8th under construction in Abu Dhabi. His net worth had crossed 800 million dirhams 2 quarters ago. Forbes Middle East had recently profiled him as one of the region's most successful hospitality entrepreneurs. At 42, he had achieved everything his father had envisioned when arranging his marriage to Soraya al-Hashimi 20 years ago. The union of old money and political power. The Al-Muhari name combined with the Al-Hashimi connections had opened doors that money alone could never access. Government contracts, diplomatic approvals, the invisible infrastructure of influence that made Dubai's elite what they were. The photograph on his desk showed the perfect family. Soraya, elegant in a cream-colored abaya, her ice-blue eyes revealing nothing. Their daughter Amira, 16 and already carrying herself with her mother's calculated poise. The twin boys, 12 years old, frozen in polite smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Rami picked up the frame, studying faces that felt like strangers. When had they last felt like family? When had he last felt anything at all? His phone buzzed. A text from Soraya. * charity gala Thursday evening. Your attendance is required. I've had Rashid add it to your calendar. * Not a request. Never a request with Soraya. Their marriage had evolved into a business partnership years ago, complete with separate bedrooms, scheduled appearances, and conversations that never ventured beyond logistics. They were civil, efficient, and utterly hollow. Rami's mind drifted to Sunday dinner 3 nights ago. The family gathered around the imported Italian marble table in their Al Bersha estate. Amira scrolling through her phone between courses. The twins arguing over some video game while their food went cold. Soraya reviewing documents, red pen moving with surgical precision. And Rami himself, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. Will you attend the charity gala Thursday? Soraya had asked without looking up from her papers. If the Singapore deal doesn't require travel, Rami had replied. I'll have Rashid put it on your calendar. The conversation had ended there. No follow-up questions. No interest in the Singapore deal or what it meant. Just the mechanical coordination of 2 people performing their assigned roles. Their marriage was a masterpiece of choreography, elegant, precise, and completely devoid of warmth. Rami stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dubai spread out below him in geometric precision. Glass towers reflecting afternoon sun. Construction cranes dotting the horizon like metal insects. Palm Jumeirah stretching into the Persian Gulf with Baroque audacity. He had helped build the city in his own small way. His hotels employed 3,000 people. His developments had transformed neighborhoods. He was a success by every measurable standard. So why did he wake every morning feeling like he was suffocating? The truth was simple and devastating. Rami had built an empire but lived in a prison. His days followed an unvarying pattern. Wake at 5 a.m., 90 minutes at the gym, pushing his body through motions that no longer brought satisfaction. Breakfast alone while Soraya managed household staff and reviewed the children's schedules. Office by 7:30. Meetings, calls, contracts, negotiations. Home by 11 p.m. Dreamless sleep induced by exhaustion rather than peace. Repeat. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. Really laughed, the kind that came from joy rather than social obligation. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt truly seen by another human being. His business partners saw his bank account. His wife saw his utility. His children saw an increasingly distant figure who signed permission slips and attended mandatory school events with distracted efficiency. 3 weeks, Rami thought, staring at his reflection in the window glass. In 3 weeks, he would meet someone who would make him feel alive again. And in less than a year, that same person would be dead by his own hand. But standing there on that May afternoon, watching Dubai's golden light fade into evening, Sheikh Rami Al-Mahari had no idea that his perfectly constructed life was about to collide with a force he couldn't control. He had no idea that feeling something, anything, would prove to be the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. The Azure Lounge occupied the top floor of the Sapphire Grand Hotel, one of Al-Mahari's primary competitors in Dubai's crowded luxury market. Rami had never been inside before Thursday, May 18, 2023. He'd driven past it countless times, dismissing it as inferior to his own properties. But that Thursday evening, when his dinner meeting with Korean investors ended 2 hours early, he found himself telling his driver to drop him at the Sapphire Grand. Just one drink, he'd said aloud to no one in particular. Then home. The Azure Lounge was exactly what he'd expected. Velvet booths in deep blues and purples. Crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across polished marble floors. A crowd of international businessmen, wealthy tourists, and local elites who preferred their socializing outside the strictest traditional confines. The music was low, sophisticated, a piano playing jazz standards with a Middle Eastern undertone. Rami took a seat at the bar, ordered a single malt whiskey, and prepared to spend exactly 30 minutes before returning to his empty mansion. That was when he saw her. Maya Delgado moved across the small performance stage with a grace that seemed impossible in the confines of the lounge. She wasn't doing anything overtly provocative. This was high-end entertainment, not a. Soraya Al-Hashimi Al-Mahari noticed the changes in her husband before he realized he was changing. After 20 years of marriage, she had become expert at reading Rami's moods, not out of affection but necessity. A good strategist understood her playing pieces, and Rami had always been her most important piece in a complex game of social and political chess. The first sign came on a Friday morning in early June. Rami was humming while reading the newspaper over breakfast. Humming. In 20 years, Soraya had never heard him hum. She looked up from her tablet, studying her husband with the cool assessment she might give a financial statement. His shoulders were less tense. His jaw, typically clenched even in sleep, was relaxed. He looked almost content. Interesting. The second sign appeared the following Thursday. Rami had been distracted all day. Amira mentioned at dinner that her father had seemed somewhere else when she'd asked him to sign a field trip permission form that morning. That evening, he showered for 30 minutes before leaving for what he claimed was a business dinner. He wore cologne. Rami never wore cologne to business dinners. Soraya said nothing. She simply watched. By the third Thursday in June, the pattern had become obvious to anyone paying attention. Rami left every Thursday evening at 8:30. He returned around midnight or later, showered immediately despite having showered before leaving, and slept more peacefully than he had in years. His phone, which had always been carelessly left on countertops and desks, suddenly had a passcode. He smiled at text messages, then quickly deleted them. Her husband was having an affair. Soraya's first reaction was not anger or hurt. Those emotions required an investment of feeling that their marriage had long since exhausted. Instead, she felt something closer to vindication. Rami was proving himself to be exactly what she'd always suspected: weak, easily led by desire, ultimately predictable. But more importantly, he was creating leverage. An affair was a weapon, and Soraya had been trained since childhood to recognize weapons when they presented themselves. Her father, Sheikh Rashid al-Hashimi, had spent 30 years in intelligence work before retiring to manage his family's investment empire. He taught his daughter that information was the most valuable currency in the world. Know what people want, he told her repeatedly. Know what they fear. Then you control them completely. Soraya wanted to know everything. She made a phone call to her cousin Mariam, who worked in hotel management across Dubai's luxury sector. The conversation was brief and coded, but the message was clear. Track Rami's movements, find out where he was going, who he was seeing, and document everything. Mariam called back within a week. Burj Tower Hotel, she said without preamble. Every Thursday. Cash payments under the name Ahmed Jazm. Same room, 1847. He's meeting someone, but I'll need another week to get security footage. Get it, Soraya said simply. The footage arrived on a Thursday evening in early July while Rami was at his weekly assignation. Soraya watched it in her private office, the one room in their sprawling estate that was exclusively hers. The video showed Rami entering the hotel at 9:02 p.m. 47 minutes later, a young woman entered. Soraya paused the footage, zooming in on the woman's face. She was beautiful in that effortless way that wealthy women paid surgeons enormous sums to recreate. Dark hair cascading past her shoulders. Warm brown eyes. A simple dress that suggested limited means but good taste. Most significantly, she was young, late 20s at most, and she walked into that hotel with the hopeful expression of someone in love. Soraya felt nothing but cold calculation. This wasn't a sophisticated mistress who understood the rules of discreet affairs among the wealthy. This was a naive girl who probably believed Rami's promises. This was someone who could be destroyed easily. Mariam provided the full dossier within days. Maya Delgado, 28 years old. Filipina national working on an entertainment visa at the Azure Lounge. Monthly salary of 2,000 dirhams. Living in a shared apartment in Al Nada with 3 other Filipino workers. Bank records showed regular deposits from Rami, 20,000 dirhams monthly, transferred to an account he'd opened under a business entity that Soraya's lawyers would later confirm was a shell company. 20,000 dirhams. Rami was spending more on his mistress monthly than most of his hotel employees earned. The money itself didn't concern Soraya. It was a rounding error in their financial portfolio. But the recklessness of it, the clear evidence of genuine feeling rather than simple physical desire, that was dangerous. Soraya expanded her surveillance. Private investigator Hamza Aldosari, who'd worked for her family for 15 years, began following Maya during her off hours. His reports painted a picture of a woman transforming before his eyes. New clothes, modest but better quality. A diamond bracelet that cost more than she'd earn in a year. Most tellingly, a lightness in her step, a constant smile, the unmistakable signs of someone who believed she'd found something precious. The fool actually thought Rami loved her. For 3 months, Soraya simply gathered evidence. Photographs of Rami and Maya entering hotels. Bank statements. Text messages retrieved through methods she preferred not to examine too closely. Love letters Maya had written but never sent, intercepted from her apartment during a routine maintenance check that Hamza had arranged with the building manager. The letters were nauseating in their sincerity. Maya wrote about futures and children and growing old together. She wrote about teaching Rami to dance, about showing him her village in the Philippines, about the life they would build once he divorced Soraya. The girl had convinced herself that this was a romance novel, that love conquered all, that a billionaire sheikh would abandon his family and empire for a dancer from a fishing village. Pathetic, but useful. By September, Soraya had everything she needed to destroy both of them. But she didn't act. Not yet. Rami was scheduled to sign a 1 billion dirham deal with her family's investment firm in March. a deal that would expand his hotel empire into Abu Dhabi and secure government contracts worth even more in future years. The deal positioned Rami as a major player in the Emirates' tourism infrastructure, but more importantly, it tied him completely to Soraya's family's interests. She would let the affair continue. Let Rami think he was getting away with it. Let him fall deeper into whatever delusion of love he was constructing. And then, the night before the deal signed, when he had absolutely everything to lose, she would strike. Soraya wanted more than exposure. She wanted total control. The opportunity came in early March, when her surveillance revealed something that changed everything. Maya was planning to go public. The naive little dancer had contacted a Filipino journalist in Manila, a man named Carlos Mendoza who specialized in stories about overseas Filipino workers facing exploitation. Maya was writing an exposé about her relationship with Rami, about the promises he'd made, about the systematic way wealthy men used and discarded foreign workers. Hamza provided transcripts of phone calls. In one, Maya told the journalist, "I need people to understand what happened, how they make you feel special, make you believe you matter, and then throw you away like garbage when it's inconvenient. His wife threatened me with detention, with deportation. She has that kind of power. I want the world to know what these people are really like." The exposé would destroy everything. Not just Rami's reputation, but her family's business interests, their social standing, possibly even the government contracts her uncle had worked years to secure. Western media loved these stories. Rich Arab man exploits poor Asian woman. The narrative practically wrote itself. They'd be international pariahs within days. Soraya made her decision with the same cool precision she applied to every strategic choice. Maya Delgado needed to disappear. Not just from Rami's life, but permanently. The threat she represented couldn't be managed or mitigated. It had to be eliminated. She scheduled her confrontation for March 14, 2024. The night before the billion-dirham deal would be signed. The moment when Rami would have absolutely everything to lose and no room to maneuver. Soraya arranged for hotel security, men on her family's payroll, to accompany her. She had Mariam provide the master keycard to room 1847. She rehearsed exactly what she would say, how she would dismantle Maya psychologically before turning to Rami, how she would present him with an impossible choice that was really no choice at all. Thursday evening, March 14th, arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, mild temperature, the kind of evening that made Dubai feel like paradise. Soraya dressed in a black Chanel abaya, applied minimal makeup, and checked her reflection with satisfaction. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman of absolute power who would tolerate no challenges to her position. At 9:47 p.m., she stood outside room 1847, listening to laughter from inside. Rami and his little dancer, wrapped in their fantasy. The sound made something cold move through Soraya's chest. Not jealousy, she'd stopped feeling jealous of Rami years ago, but a deep, fundamental disgust at the weakness that allowed him to risk everything for feeling. She used the keycard. The door opened smoothly. Inside, Rami and Maya froze. They were on the bed, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets, completely at ease in a world that was about to shatter. Maya wore only Rami's shirt and the diamond bracelet. Rami's face drained of all color as he saw his wife standing in the doorway, flanked by security guards in al-Hashimi uniforms. "Get dressed," Soraya said calmly, her voice carrying the temperature of winter. "Both of you, you have 2 minutes. The guards will wait outside." She watched Rami scramble for his clothes, watched Maya's hands shake as she tried to button her dress. When the door closed, leaving the three of them alone, Soraya allowed herself a small smile. The game was ending exactly as she'd planned. And Maya Delgado, the foolish dancer who'd believed in love, was about to learn a lesson about power that she wouldn't survive long enough to remember. The silence in room 1847 felt like a physical presence, pressing against skin, making it difficult to breathe. Maya's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, each one feeling impossibly small, impossible to grasp. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Rami stood frozen near the window, pants on but shirt still unbuttoned, staring at his wife with the expression of a man watching his execution. Soraya moved with deliberate slowness, pulling her phone from her designer handbag. She began photographing the room methodically. The champagne glasses on the nightstand, one still bearing Maya's lipstick. The rose petals scattered across rumpled sheets. The expensive silk robe Rami had bought for Maya hanging on the bathroom door. Each click of the camera shutter sounded like a nail being driven into a coffin. "What's your name?" Soraya asked Maya without looking at her, still photographing. "Am Maya Delgado, ma'am." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Do you know who I am?" His wife. Now Soraya looked at her directly, and Maya felt the full force of those ice-blue eyes. "I am Soraya al-Hashimi al-Muhari. My father is Sheikh Rashid al-Hashimi. My uncle is the Minister of Interior Affairs. Do you understand what that means?" Maya had heard enough stories from other Filipino workers to know exactly what it meant. Women who'd been accused of crimes they didn't commit. Detention centers where you could disappear for months without trial. Deportations that happened so quickly family members back home didn't even know to be worried until it was over. Her knees felt weak. Soraya photographed Maya's purse on the chair, methodically removing items. Labor card, passport copy, work visa documentation. She held up the visa, studying it with theatrical interest. Entertainment visa, issued to Azure Lounge. Expires in 12 days. Soraya's smile was terrible to see. "Were you planning to renew it? Or were you planning to stay here illegally while you destroyed my family?" "I wasn't. I didn't mean—" Maya couldn't form complete sentences. "You're aware that prostitution is illegal in the UAE?" The word hit Maya like a slap. "I'm not a prostitute. I love him." Soraya actually laughed. A crystalline sound completely devoid of warmth. "Love? How touching." She turned to Rami, who still hadn't moved. "Did you hear that, darling? She loves you. After 8 months of expensive hotel rooms and 20,000 dirhams monthly, she's convinced this is love rather than a transaction." "Soraya, please," Rami's voice cracked. "I'm not finished." Soraya photographed the diamond bracelet on Maya's wrist, zooming in to capture the detail. "When immigration reviews these photos, your bank deposits from my husband, the jewelry worth more than you'd earn in 5 years, do you think they'll see love? Or will they see a foreign worker engaging in immoral activity?" Maya felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Rami desperately, waiting for him to defend her, to tell his wife that what they had was real. But Rami wouldn't meet her eyes. Soraya moved to the nightstand, photographing the champagne bottle with its expensive label. "Let me explain how this works, Miss Delgado. I have documentation of every Thursday you've met my husband here. I have security footage of you entering this room 53 times over the past 8 months. I have bank records showing regular payments that you cannot possibly justify as legitimate employment income." She paused, letting the words sink in like poison. "When I take this evidence to the authorities, you will be detained. Not arrested immediately, that would be too quick. First comes detention at Al-Awar facility while they investigate. No lawyer unless you can afford one, which you cannot. No consulate access for the first 72 hours. No contact with your family." Maya's breathing became rapid, shallow. She'd heard about Al-Awar from other workers. The heat, the overcrowding, women who went in for minor visa violations and didn't come out for months. "The investigation would take time," Soraya continued, her voice almost gentle now, which made it more terrifying. "During that time, anything could happen. Heat stroke, illness, accidents. Foreign workers die in detention all the time. The authorities file reports. The embassies express concern. Nothing changes." "You can't," Maya started. "I can do whatever I want," Soraya said simply. "That's what you never understood about this situation. You thought you were in a romance. You were actually in a transaction involving 2 parties with vastly unequal power. And now the transaction is ending." Rami finally found his voice. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air. Soraya turned to her husband, and Maya saw something pass between them. A communication built on 20 years of marriage, of understanding exactly how the other one thought. "First," Soraya said, "she disappears. Tonight. I never see her or hear about her again. If I do, these photos go to immigration, police, and media. She'll be in detention within hours. Maya looked at Rami, searching his face for any sign that he would fight this. Tell her, she pleaded. Tell her it's not like that you. But Rami was already pulling away from her, emotionally if not yet physically. Second, Soraya continued, addressing Rami now. Tomorrow you sign the deal with my father. You smile, you thank him, and you never disgrace this family again. Third, you transfer 40% of your business holdings into a trust for our children, with me as trustee. I want insurance that you'll never forget this lesson. And if I refuse? Rami's voice was barely audible. Then I burn it all down. Your business, your reputation, your access to your children. The Abu Dhabi deal dies. Your partners will distance themselves when the scandal breaks. Our children will be humiliated at school when everyone knows their father was fucking hired help. The crude language was clearly calculated. Soraya never spoke like that. She was showing Maya exactly how little she mattered. Not even worth proper vocabulary. And she, Soraya gestured dismissively at Maya, gets deported after spending months in Alawar prison. Maybe longer if my family has anything to say about it. These things can be arranged. A foreign worker with no connections, no money, no rights? She could disappear completely and no one would even notice. Maya felt the room spinning. This couldn't be happening. 8 months of Thursdays. 8 months of Rami telling her she was special, that what they had was real, that he'd never felt this way before. 8 months of building a future in her imagination. A small house, teaching dance, growing old together. All of it evaporating like morning mist. Rami, please, she whispered, gripping his arm. Don't do this. We can fight this together. We can. He pulled away from her touch like it burned. The movement was small, but it told Maya everything she needed to know. She staggered backward, understanding flooding through her with devastating clarity. He was going to abandon her. After everything he'd promised, after all the futures they'd planned, after 8 months of whispered I love yous in the dark. He was choosing his wife, his wealth, his world. He was choosing everything except her. You told me you loved me, Maya said, her voice breaking completely. Rami finally looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was worse than hatred. It was resignation, decision, the death of whatever he'd felt for her. Murdered by fear and self-preservation. It was just fun, Maya. You knew that. The words landed like physical blows. Maya's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the edge of the bed. Their bed, where just 30 minutes ago they'd been laughing, planning their escape, talking about the life they'd build together. All of it had been a lie. Or maybe it had been real for a moment and now it was being retroactively erased, transformed into something cheap and meaningless. I lied, Rami added, and even though Maya could see the tears in his eyes, even though she could see that this was destroying him too, it didn't matter. He was doing it anyway. Soraya watched Maya's collapse with visible satisfaction. She pulled out her phone and made a brief call. Send them in. The 2 security guards entered. They weren't rough with Maya, they didn't need to be. She moved like a sleepwalker as they guided her toward the door, gathering her purse, her jacket, the small bag where she kept the romance novels she'd read while waiting for Rami on previous Thursdays. You have 48 hours to leave Dubai, Soraya said to Maya's retreating back. If you're still here after that, I'll have you arrested. Don't test me. I don't make empty threats. At the door, Maya looked back one final time. Rami was standing by the window, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking. He looked like a man being torn apart. But he wasn't stopping this. He wasn't choosing her. The elevator ride down felt infinite. The security guards were silent, professional. When they reached the lobby, they released her without a word, and she stumbled out into Dubai's night air. The city glittered around her, indifferent to her devastation. She stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, unable to remember how to move, how to breathe, how to exist in a world where the last 8 months had been revealed as fiction. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rosa, her younger sister and roommate. 8. Where are you? Are you okay? Maya tried to respond, but her fingers wouldn't work properly. She flagged a taxi instead, gave her Al Nada address in a voice she didn't recognize as her own. During the drive, she stared at the diamond bracelet still on her wrist. Rami had given it to her 2 months ago, slipping it onto her arm while kissing her shoulder, whispering that she deserved beautiful things. She wanted to tear it off. She wanted to throw it out the taxi window. Instead, she just sat there, watching the lights of Dubai blur past, feeling herself fragment into someone she didn't recognize. Back in room 1847, after the guards had escorted Maya out, Rami remained frozen by the window. Soraya gathered her belongings with methodical precision, checking that she had all the photographic evidence safely stored. "Tomorrow," she said without looking at her husband. "10 a.m., my father's office. Don't be late." Soraya. And Rami? Now she looked at him, and her expression was almost kind, which somehow made it worse. "Thank you for making this so easy. I wasn't sure you'd have the spine to abandon her. But you did exactly what I knew you'd do. You chose survival over sentiment. Very practical." After she left, Rami stood alone in the room that had been his sanctuary for 8 months. He could smell Maya's perfume on the sheets, could see the indentation where her body had pressed into the mattress, could hear the echo of her voice saying "I loved you so much" before understanding that he was killing more than their relationship. He stumbled to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. Then he sat on the cold marble floor, back against the bathtub, and cried like he hadn't cried since childhood. Not because he'd lost Maya, though that grief was real and sharp, but because he'd just discovered something terrible about himself. When threatened with consequences, when forced to choose between love and security, he was exactly the coward he'd always suspected he might be. He was a man who would sacrifice anything to protect his comfortable cage. The worst part was knowing that he'd do it again. Given the same choice, facing the same threats, he would make the same decision every time. That's what 20 years of calculated living had made him. That's what his perfectly constructed life had cost. Rami picked up his phone to call Maya, to apologize, to try to explain. But he stopped before dialing. What would he say? That he was sorry but nothing would change? That he loved her but not enough? That she'd been right to hope and wrong to trust? He deleted her number instead, blocked it, removed every trace of her from his phone like she'd never existed. Then he went home to his mansion, to his separate bedroom, to his wife who now owned him completely. And he began the process of forgetting, or trying to, because Maya Delgado was about to teach him something he'd never considered. Some things once done cannot be forgotten. Some people once destroyed haunt you forever. And the price of cowardice sometimes comes due in ways you never imagined possible. 10 days after the confrontation in room 1847, Maya Delgado made a decision that would sign her death warrant. She was going to tell the truth. The first 3 days after that Thursday night, Maya didn't leave the apartment. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep except in brief, nightmare-plagued intervals. Her roommates, Annalyn, Christina, and her younger sister Rosa, took turns sitting with her, bringing her water she didn't drink, food she couldn't swallow. They'd seen heartbreak before among the Filipina workers in Dubai. Failed relationships with men who'd promised futures they never intended to deliver. But this was different. Maya looked like something fundamental had broken inside her. "You need to leave Dubai," Rosa kept saying. "8, please. That woman threatened you. You can't stay here." But Maya couldn't move. She was paralyzed by a grief so profound it felt terminal. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rami's face. Not the face from their Thursdays together, laughing, tender, present, but the face from that hotel room. The moment he'd chosen to save himself by destroying her. It was just fun. You knew that. The words played on loop in her mind. Had she known? Had there been signs she'd deliberately ignored? She replayed every conversation, every promise, looking for the moment the truth had revealed itself and she'd chosen blindness instead. But she couldn't find it. Either Rami had been an extraordinary liar or he'd actually meant it and killed it anyway when it became inconvenient. She didn't know which possibility hurt more. On day 4, Soraya's psychological warfare began. A message arrived on Maya's phone. A photo of Rami at a family dinner. He was sitting at an enormous table with his wife and children, smiling at something one of the twins was saying. He looked perfectly fine, perfectly normal, like nothing had happened, like Maya had never existed. The caption read, "He's forgotten you already. You were nothing." Maya stared at the photo for 20 minutes. The casual cruelty of it, the deliberate twisting of the knife, sparked something besides grief. Anger. Pure, righteous fury at the injustice of it all. On day 6, another message. This time a photo from some business event. Rami in an expensive suit, Soraya on his arm in couture, both of them looking like the perfect power couple. The caption. A toy he discarded. Not even worth remembering. On day 8, a screenshot of Rami's blocked numbers list with Maya's phone number highlighted. Caption, "You never existed." That night, sitting on the floor of the apartment she shared with 3 other women, staring at her expired visa and dwindling bank account, Maya made her decision. She couldn't make Rami love her. She couldn't force him to acknowledge what they'd shared, but she could make sure he didn't do this to someone else. She could make sure that he and his wife didn't get to simply erase her like she'd never mattered. She was going to go public. Maya spent 2 days writing everything down. Dates, conversations, every detail of their 8-month relationship. The promises Rami had made. The money he'd transferred. The futures they'd planned. The confrontation with Soraya. The threats of detention and deportation. She wrote about the systematic way wealthy men in Dubai used foreign workers, as entertainment, as convenience, as disposable pleasure with no consequences. She contacted Carlos Mendoza, a Filipino journalist in Manila who specialized in overseas Filipino worker rights issues. His response came within hours. "This is exactly the story we need. Can you provide evidence?" Maya sent him everything. Bank transfer records. Photos of her and Rami together. His face carefully cropped out but her face clear. The hotel rooms visible in the background. Text messages from before he'd blocked her. Her handwritten account of everything that had happened. The article was scheduled to publish in 1 week. Maya knew it would destroy her too. She'd probably be arrested, definitely deported. But at least it would mean something. At least other women would see what happened when you trusted men like Rami. At least she wouldn't disappear silently. She had no idea that Soraya's surveillance network would intercept her communications within 24 hours. She had no idea that her attempt at justice would instead become her death sentence. Hamza Aldosari had been monitoring Maya's communications since the confrontation. When he intercepted the email to the journalist and downloaded the draft exposé, he immediately forwarded everything to Soraya. The timestamp was 11:47 p.m. By 11:52 p.m., Soraya was calling Rami to an emergency meeting. Rami arrived at their home office at 12:30 a.m., disheveled from fitful sleep. He'd been existing in a fog for the past 10 days, going through the mechanical motions of signing the deal with Soraya's father, transferring the business assets, attending meetings he barely remembered. He was drinking heavily, eating barely at all, and seeing Maya's face every time he closed his eyes. Soraya didn't waste time with pleasantries. She played him the intercepted phone call between Maya and the journalist, showed him the written exposé on her laptop screen, let him read through Maya's detailed account of their relationship, her description of the confrontation, her analysis of power dynamics and exploitation in Dubai. "Your little dancer is about to destroy everything," Soraya said flatly when Rami finished reading. Human interest story. Powerful Dubai Sheikh exploits poor Filipino worker. The Western media will devour it. Our family will be humiliated internationally. Your business partners will distance themselves. The Abu Dhabi deal will collapse. Our children will be mocked at school. Everything we've built will burn. Rami felt panic rising in his chest. "I'll talk to her. I'll pay her off. Money won't work anymore." Soraya's voice was ice. "She's beyond that now. She doesn't want compensation. She wants revenge. Or martyrdom. Or both. She wants the world to know what happened to her. And she doesn't care what it costs her personally." "Then what do we do?" Soraya leaned forward, her ice blue eyes boring into Rami. Women like her disappear in Dubai every year. Domestic workers, dancers, escorts, they run away, they overdose, they have accidents. The authorities barely investigate. Their embassies file reports that go nowhere. Life continues. The implication hung between them like smoke. What are you saying? Rami's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying she's a problem that requires a permanent solution. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about survival. Your survival. Our family's survival. Our children's future. Soraya's expression didn't change. You created this problem when you couldn't keep your dick in your pants. Now you fix it. Or I will. And you'll owe me for the rest of your life. You'll be complicit either way, but at least this way you maintain some agency. Rami stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. I can't. I won't. Then you're choosing to destroy your children's lives. You're choosing to humiliate Amira at university, to have your sons expelled from their school. You're choosing to make your daughter the subject of international headlines about her father's prostitute. Don't call her that. Soraya's smile was terrible. That's what she'll be called in every article, every comment section, every conversation. Your little Filipina whore who thought she could blackmail a prominent family. That's the story the media will write. Unless she never gets the chance to tell her version. Rami felt something crumbling inside his chest. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not anymore. She's made her choice. Now you make yours. Soraya stood, smoothing her designer pajamas. I'm going to bed. Fix this however you need to. I don't want details. I just want the problem solved before that article publishes. She left Rami alone in the office at 1:15 a.m. He sat in the darkness for hours, staring at Maya's exposé on the laptop screen, reading her words about how much she'd loved him, about how she'd trusted him, about how his betrayal had felt like dying. He tried to imagine alternatives. Paying her more money, but Soraya was right, Maya was past that. Threatening her family, too monstrous, he couldn't do that. Running away with her, he'd lose everything, his children would grow up without a father. Letting the article publish, he calculated the damage and it was catastrophic. His business would lose 80% of its value. Social exile. His children's trauma. As dawn broke over Dubai, Rami made a decision that would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. He would do what Soraya suggested. He would eliminate the problem permanently. He would murder Maya Delgado. The justifications came easily, which terrified him. She brought this on herself by threatening to go public. She should have left when Soraya gave her the chance. She was choosing to destroy his children's futures for her own revenge. What kind of father would he be if he let her do that? It was her life or his children's lives. When framed that way, there was only one choice. He spent 2 days researching methods, learning about pills that could stop a heart, reading about foreign worker deaths that went uninvestigated, understanding the patterns that would make Maya's death look like suicide rather than murder. On day 3, he visited Dr. Mansour Ahmed, a physician friend who owed Rami favors from years of referring wealthy patients. Rami claimed he was having terrible insomnia, that the stress was destroying him. Dr. Ahmed prescribed powerful sedatives without asking too many questions. When Rami asked for something stronger, something to guarantee sleep, the doctor hesitated only briefly before writing a second prescription. Don't take more than one of each, Dr. Ahmed warned. This combination could stop your heart. Rami pocketed the pills and felt his soul compress into something small and hard and deadly. He bought a burner phone, composed the text message carefully. It's me. I've made a terrible mistake. I love you. I'm leaving Soraya. Meet me tonight, our hotel, our room. 10 p.m. Come alone. I'll explain everything. Please give me this chance. K. He booked room 1847 under the fake name Ahmed Jazm, paying cash for 3 nights. He acquired rose petals, champagne, a small gift, a silk scarf to echo happier Thursdays. He practiced his lies in the mirror until he almost believed them himself. I love you. I'm leaving everything for you. We'll go to the Philippines together. We'll start over. The words came easily, maybe too easily. Rami had always been good at convincing himself of convenient fictions. On March 28, 2024, at 8:47 p.m., he sent the text message. Then he went to the hotel to prepare a murder scene disguised as reconciliation. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself this was about protecting his family. He told himself Maya had forced his hand. He told himself everything except the truth, that he was about to commit murder because it was easier than facing consequences, that he was going to kill a woman who'd loved him because saving her threatened his comfort, that he was becoming exactly the monster he'd always feared lurked beneath his carefully constructed persona. At 9:47 p.m., as he crushed the pills into powder and stirred them into champagne, Rami's hands were perfectly steady. By the time Maya knocked on the door at 10:02 p.m., he had convinced himself that what he was about to do was necessary, justified, the only option. The door opened. Maya stood there in the dress from their first date, hope written across her face like prophecy. "Rami," she whispered. "Maya," he replied, and welcomed her in to die. Maya stepped into room 1847, and for a moment, everything felt like it used to. The rose petals scattered across the bed, the champagne chilling in its silver bucket, the low amber lighting that made everything feel intimate and separate from the world outside. Rami stood by the window, backlit by Dubai's glittering skyline, and when he turned to face her, genuine emotion flooded his features. Not the emotion Maya thought she was seeing. Not love or relief or joy at their reunion. What crossed Rami's face was grief, anticipatory mourning for what he was about to do. But Maya, desperate to believe in second chances, interpreted it as regret for the pain he'd caused her. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Rami said, his voice rough. "I wasn't sure I should." Maya stood awkwardly near the door, caught between hope and self-preservation. Her roommates had begged her not to come. Rosa had actually cried, gripping Maya's hands and saying, "Please, this feels wrong. This feels like a trap." But Maya had needed to know if any of it had been real. Needed to hear Rami say he loved her one more time, even if it was the last time. Rami crossed the room and took her hands in his. They were warm, slightly trembling. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For what I said in this room 10 days ago. For letting Soraya destroy us. For being too weak to fight for what we had." Maya felt tears starting. "You said it was just fun. You said you lied about loving me." "I lied about lying." Rami's thumb traced circles on her palm, the gesture achingly familiar. Soraya was there, her guards, panicked. "I thought if I could convince her that you meant nothing, she'd leave you alone. But these past 10 days without you, Maya, I've been dying inside." It was exactly what Maya needed to hear, the justification that made sense of her pain. Of course he'd had to perform for his wife. Of course he'd sacrificed their relationship in that moment to protect her from worse consequences. She wanted so badly to believe it. "Your wife threatened me," Maya said quietly. "She said she'd have me arrested, deported, that I could disappear and no one would notice." I know what she said." Rami pulled Maya closer, wrapping his arms around her. She collapsed into the embrace, breathing in his cologne, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. "But I'm done being afraid of her. I'm done living this lie." "What are you saying?" "I'm leaving her. Officially. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." The lies came smoothly practiced. "We'll have to be careful at first. Her family is powerful and they'll try to make things difficult. But I don't care anymore. I can't live without you." Maya pulled back to look at his face, searching for deception. But Rami had spent the past 3 days preparing for this performance. He knew exactly which expressions to make, which emotions to channel. He let himself feel the genuine grief of what he was doing, the murder of something precious, and Maya read it as passion. "We could go to the Philippines," Rami continued, leading her to the sitting area. "Start fresh somewhere her family can't reach. You've always talked about opening that dance studio. I could help you build it. We could have a simple life. Just us." "You'd really give up everything?" Maya's voice was small, hopeful. "Your business? Your wealth? None of it means anything without you. Rami poured champagne into 2 glasses, his back to Maya so she couldn't see his hands shaking. The drugged glass, he'd marked it with a tiny scratch on the base, went in his right hand. I realized something these past 10 days. I'd rather have one real moment with you than a lifetime of expensive emptiness with her. He turned and offered Maya the poison glass. To new beginnings. Maya took the glass, her smile transforming her face into something radiant. To us. They clinked glasses and Maya drank deeply. The champagne tasted slightly bitter, but she attributed it to the expensive vintage. She'd learned that costly things often had complex, unpleasant undertones. She had no idea how literally true that observation was. For the next 15 minutes, they talked about their imaginary future. Maya described the dance studio in detail, how she'd teach children from her village, how they'd offer scholarships to families who couldn't afford lessons. Rami talked about learning to fish with Maya's father, about trading his tailored suits for simple clothes, about discovering who he was beneath the layers of expectation and obligation. Each word Rami spoke was simultaneously true and false. True in that some part of him genuinely wanted that life. False in that he was never going to choose it. He was a man drowning in hypotheticals while actively committing murder. At 10:20 p.m., 15 minutes after Maya had consumed the drugged champagne, she touched her forehead with a confused expression. I feel strange. You're probably just exhausted, Rami said, guiding her toward the bed. You've been through so much stress. Lie down for a moment. Maya complied, settling onto the rose petals that now felt like funeral flowers. The room had started to spin gently, not unpleasant yet, just disorienting. Like the world was tilting on an axis she couldn't quite identify. Tell me more about the dance studio, Rami said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. He needed her talking, needed her distracted from the physical sensations as the rohypnol took effect. Maya tried to focus. There's this space near the beach, windows facing the water. Students could watch the waves while they practice. Her words were starting to slur slightly. Rami, I really don't feel well. Just rest. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. By 10:30 p.m., the sedatives had fully activated. Maya's vision blurred. Her limbs felt impossibly heavy, disconnected from her body. She tried to sit up and couldn't coordinate the movement. Panic began to cut through the chemical fog. Something's wrong, she mumbled. Can't feel my. That's when understanding dawned. Maya's eyes, despite the drugs making them heavy and unfocused, suddenly sharpened with terrible clarity. She looked at her champagne glass on the nightstand, then at Rami's untouched glass, then at Rami's face, where she saw guilt written so clearly it was like reading a confession. You drugged me? The words came out thick, slurred, but the horror in them was crystal clear. Rami's composure cracked. Tears started streaming down his face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Maya. You have to understand. What did you give me? Maya tried to move, to reach for her phone, but her body wouldn't respond. The paralysis was creeping through her systematically. Rami, what did you do? You were going to destroy everything. His voice broke completely. The article, the journalist. You were going to ruin my children's lives. I couldn't let you do that. I loved you. Maya's voice was a whisper now, the drugs stealing her ability to project sound. I loved you so much. How could you? I know you did. I know. Rami was sobbing now, still holding her hand like they were lovers instead of murderer and victim. I loved you too. That's what makes this so. Then don't. Maya's hand gripped his weakly, whatever strength she had left channeled into this final plea. Please. Hospital. I won't tell, I promise. I'll disappear. I'll go back to the Philippines. I'll never contact you again. Just please, please don't let me die. For one brief moment, Rami considered it. Considered calling for help, rushing her to emergency care, confessing everything. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spider silk. Then he thought about the article, the exposé that would publish, the destruction of his family, his daughter's humiliation. his son's trauma, the loss of everything he'd built. He didn't move. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, and the words were useless, empty. The most inadequate phrase in any language for what he was doing. Maya's breathing became shallow. At 10:45 p.m., her heart rate began to slow. Rami could feel it in her pulse beneath his fingers. She was still conscious, still aware, trapped in a body that was shutting down system by system. Tears rolled down her temples into her hair. She couldn't speak anymore, couldn't move, could only lie there experiencing her own murder in slow motion. "I'm sorry," Rami kept repeating, like a mantra, like an absolution he didn't deserve. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." At 10:55 p.m., Maya's muscles stopped responding entirely. Respiratory depression set in, her lungs forgetting how to pull air. Rami watched her chest rise and fall in increasingly shallow movements, each breath a little weaker than the last. Maya's final thought, in the moments before darkness claimed her completely, was of Rosa, her baby sister who'd warned her not to come, who'd known this was a trap even when Maya's desperate heart couldn't accept it. She hoped Rosa would understand that it wasn't stupidity that brought Maya to this room. It was love. Foolish, trusting, fatal love. At 11:02 p.m., Maya Delgado took her last breath. Rami sat beside her body for 7 minutes, watching her open eyes stare at nothing. The beautiful brown eyes that had looked at him with such adoration, that had crinkled with laughter during their Thursdays together, that had filled with hope when she'd walked into this room 90 minutes ago. Now they were just glass, reflecting the amber lamplight and revealing nothing. He gently closed her eyelids. Then he stumbled to the bathroom and vomited until his stomach cramped with emptiness. When he emerged, shaking and hollow, Maya's body was already cooling on the bed. The rose petals around her looked obscene now, a romantic gesture twisted into a funeral arrangement. Rami pulled out his phone with trembling hands, dialed Soraya's number. When she answered on the first ring, he could barely form words. "It's done. Good. Stay there. Help is coming." The line went dead. Rami sat in the chair by the window and stared at Maya's body for the 45 minutes it took for Soraya's cleaners to arrive. He didn't think, didn't plan, didn't pray. He just existed in a space beyond thought, beyond feeling, in the empty place where his soul used to be. The two men who arrived at 11:47 p.m. wore maintenance uniforms but moved with the efficiency of professionals who'd done this before. Youssef was tall and silent. Jasm was compact and methodical. Neither asked questions or showed emotion. They were tools performing a function. "You're the husband?" Jasm asked Rami without looking at him. Rami nodded, unable to speak. "Don't speak. Just listen." Jasm began photographing the room, documenting everything before they started the staging. "You were never here. You don't know this woman. Your credit card was not used, you paid cash under a fake name. Security footage from your arrival has been erased. Hotel management has been compensated for their discretion." While Jasm photographed, Youssef was already working on the suicide scene. He produced an empty pill bottle, Rohypnol, the label carefully aged to look like it had been in Maya's possession for weeks. He placed it on the nightstand with Maya's fingerprints carefully transferred onto the plastic. "The note," Jasm said, handing Rami a piece of paper. The suicide note was written in Tagalog, forged in handwriting that matched samples they'd obtained from Maya's hotel registration cards over the past 8 months. Rami couldn't read it, but Jasm translated emotionlessly. "I can't live with the shame. I thought he loved me. I was so stupid. I have nothing left. I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry, Rosa. This is better for everyone." The casual expertise with which they'd created this forgery made Rami want to vomit again. How many times had they done this? How many women had disappeared this way, their deaths staged as suicides or accidents, their stories erased by men with money and connections? Youssef was cleaning the room with professional precision. Every surface Rami had touched was wiped. His champagne glass was washed and removed entirely. Maya's glass was positioned near her hand, her fingerprints the only ones present. The rose petals were adjusted to look less deliberately romantic, and more like a woman's sad attempt to feel special before ending her life. Jasm photographed Maya's purse, carefully removing anything that connected to Rami. Bank transfer records on her phone were deleted using software that Rami didn't understand. Text messages erased. Call logs wiped. Her labor card and expired visa were left prominently visible, the story of a foreign worker who couldn't handle the pressure. The body positioning is important, Youssef said, and Rami realized with horror that they were talking about Maya like she was a prop. They laid her in a peaceful position, on her back, hands folded across her stomach, the diamond bracelet clearly visible on her wrist. "Why leave the bracelet?" Rami asked, the first words he'd spoken since the cleaners arrived. "Identification," Jasm said simply, "makes it easier for authorities. Rich jewelry on poor worker raises questions, but not enough to contradict suicide. Just shows she had a boyfriend who bought her things. Common story." At 2:15 a.m., they were finished. The room looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, the scene of a tragic suicide. A foreign worker overwhelmed by circumstances, expired visa making her desperate, ending her life in a hotel room she couldn't really afford. "Your clothes," Youssef said to Rami, handing him different garments. "Change. We'll burn what you're wearing." Rami changed mechanically in the bathroom, avoiding his reflection in the mirror. He couldn't bear to look at himself. When he emerged, Jasm handed him car keys. "Different vehicle. Parked in the service area. Your original car is already at your residence." He recited an address in a monotone. "Drive there. Enter through the service entrance. No cameras in that corridor. Your wife is waiting." They escorted Rami out through passages he didn't know existed, down service elevators and through kitchen areas where night staff carefully avoided looking at them. The car was a generic sedan, completely unlike his usual Mercedes. Rami drove through empty Dubai streets in a fugue state, seeing nothing, thinking nothing. He arrived home at 3:22 a.m. Soraya was waiting in the darkened kitchen, perfectly composed despite the hour. She looked at him with neither sympathy nor condemnation, just cool assessment. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done," Rami echoed. "Then we never speak of this again. You understand? This never happened. That woman never existed in our lives." Rami nodded and walked past her toward his bedroom. He showered for 90 minutes, scrubbing his skin until it was raw, unable to wash away the sensation of Maya's weakening pulse under his fingers. When he finally emerged and collapsed into bed, sleep wouldn't come. He lay in the darkness, eyes open, replaying the 23 minutes of watching Maya die. At 7:30 a.m., his phone buzzed with a news alert. "Foreign worker found dead in hotel room. Apparent suicide." The article was brief, clinical. No name published. Just another statistic in a city where foreign worker deaths barely registered as news. Rami read it 3 times, searching for something. Guilt, justice, exposure, anything to indicate that what he'd done mattered. But there was nothing. Maya had disappeared as completely as Soraya had promised. Erased. Forgotten. As if 8 months of Thursdays, of whispered promises and shared dreams, had never existed at all. He got out of bed and vomited again. Then he poured his first whiskey of the day at 8:17 a.m. and began the process of trying to live with what he'd done. 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days after Maya Delgado died in room 1847, Sheikh Rami Al-Mohari stood on his penthouse balcony at 3:47 a.m. and considered jumping. It wasn't the first time. He'd stood in this exact spot, looking down at the 14-story drop to the manicured gardens below, at least 200 times since the murder. Every calculation was the same. 7 seconds of falling. Impact velocity of approximately 120 kilometers per hour. Death would be instantaneous, painless, final. But he never jumped, because Soraya had designed something far more elegant than his death. She'd designed his life as punishment. Rami was 44 years old but looked 60. His hair had gone completely gray within 6 months of Maya's murder. He'd lost 32 pounds, his expensive suits hanging loose on a frame that had forgotten how to nourish itself. His hands trembled constantly, a combination of alcohol withdrawal and psychological deterioration that no amount of medication could stabilize. The business empire he'd murdered to protect was now entirely under Soraya's control. The 40% transferred to the Children's Trust had been just the beginning. Over the following 2 years, as Rami's performance deteriorated, Soraya had systematically assumed operational authority over Al-Muhari hotels. Board meetings he couldn't attend due to health issues. Contracts he was too unstable to negotiate. Partnerships that required someone competent at the helm. His partners had stopped calling him. His employees reported to Soraya. His name was still on the company letterhead, but it was an empty title attached to a broken man. The children had drifted even further. Amira, now 19 and studying forensic psychology at King's College London, barely spoke to him during her brief visits home. The twins, 15, actively avoided being alone with their father. They'd learned to navigate around his alcoholism, his unpredictable emotional states, his tendency to start crying at dinner without explanation. The only constant presence in Rami's life, besides Soraya's cold triumph, was Rosa Delgado. Soraya had hired Maya's younger sister 6 months after the murder, bringing her to work as domestic help in the Al-Muhari household. The cruelty of it was masterful. Rosa looked almost identical to Maya. Same warm brown eyes, same gentle smile, same voice with its soft Tagalog accent. Every morning when Rosa brought Rami his coffee, he saw the ghost of the woman he'd murdered. "Good morning, sir. Did you sleep well?" Rosa would ask with professional courtesy, and Rami would lie. "Fine, thank you," never mentioning the nightmares, never revealing that he'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying Maya's death in 23-minute loops. Did Rosa know? Rami sometimes caught her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Suspicion, knowledge, hatred. She'd never said anything directly, but her presence was a constant accusation. Every time she served dinner, every time she cleaned his office, every time she smiled politely and called him sir, Rami died a little more. On the balcony, Rami lit his 7th cigarette of the morning. He'd started smoking again a year ago, despite never having been a smoker before. He welcomed the poison, welcomed anything that might accelerate his exit from this life without requiring the courage to actively end it. The sun was beginning to rise over Dubai, painting the glass towers in shades of pink and gold. From this height, the city looked beautiful, clean, ordered. Nothing like the rot underneath. Nothing like the invisible architecture of exploitation that made the gleaming skyline possible. Rami thought about Maya constantly. Not the woman from their Thursdays together, that Maya had been transformed by memory into something simultaneously more and less than human. He thought about the Maya who died in room 1847. The terror in her eyes when she realized what he'd done. The way she'd begged for her life, promising to disappear, to never contact him again. The desperate grip of her hand getting weaker and weaker until it was just dead weight in his palm. He thought about her sister Rosa, serving him breakfast every morning, not knowing she was feeding her sister's murderer, or maybe knowing and simply being powerless to do anything about it. That possibility haunted Rami almost as much as the murder itself. Inside the penthouse, he heard Soraya's voice giving instructions to staff. She was awake early, as always, managing the empire while her husband dissolved into alcoholism and guilt. She hadn't touched him in 2 years, barely spoke to him beyond logistics. Their marriage had completed its transformation into something beyond loveless. It was a prison, with Soraya as both warden and executioner. Sometimes Rami wondered why she didn't just divorce him. She had all the power now. She didn't need him for business or social standing. But then he understood, divorce would release him. This was better. Keeping him alive but destroyed, watching him suffer every day, knowing he was trapped by his own crime. A door opened behind him. Rami turned to see Amira stepping onto the balcony, wrapped in a cardigan against the morning chill. His daughter looked at him with an expression that mixed concern and something else. Something that looked like knowledge. "Baba, we need to talk." Amira Al-Muhari had been investigating her father's breakdown for 8 months. It had started as intellectual curiosity, a research project for her forensic psychology program about trauma and guilt. But it had evolved into something far more personal when the patterns became impossible to ignore. She'd created a timeline. March 29, 2024. The exact date her father's personality had fundamentally changed. The date he'd started drinking heavily, stopped eating, developed the tremor in his hands. The date that coincided with a news item about a Filipino worker found dead in a hotel room. She'd cross-referenced that date with her father's credit card statements, accessible through her mother's accounts. Cash payments to Burj Tower Hotel. Regular Thursday night bookings that stopped abruptly on March 28, the day before the worker's death. She'd interviewed Rosa during a video call, carefully, indirectly asking about her sister. Rosa had broken down, telling Amira about Maya's relationship with a wealthy married man, about the promises he'd made, about the final text message, going to meet Rami. If I'm not back by midnight, call police. She'd found photos in Rosa's phone, pictures of Maya wearing a diamond bracelet, standing in luxury hotel rooms, her face radiant with hope, pictures that Rosa had received from Maya during those 8 months of Thursdays. The man's face was always carefully cropped out, but Amira recognized the build, the posture, the expensive watch visible in one frame. She'd analyzed the suicide investigation report, public record once she knew where to look, the cursory nature of it, the assumption of suicide with minimal evidence, the quick cremation before Maya's family could request an autopsy, the anonymous charitable donation of $50,000 to the Delgado family that had appeared just days after the death. All the pieces formed a picture that Amira didn't want to see but couldn't unsee. Her father had been having an affair with Maya Delgado. Something had ended it violently, probably her mother's discovery. Maya had died under suspicious circumstances. Her father had immediately deteriorated into the broken shell she saw before her now. The conclusion was inescapable, unbearable, but scientifically, psychologically, logically inevitable. Her father had murdered Maya Delgado. Now, standing on the balcony at dawn, Amira looked at Rami and saw not the man who'd taught her to ride a bicycle or helped her with homework, but a murderer who'd been living with his crime for 2 years. "I know what you did," she said quietly. Rami's face drained of all color. "Amira, I know about Maya Delgado. I know about the affair. I know she died in a hotel room the night before your big deal with Mother's family." Amira's voice was steady, clinical, the voice of a researcher presenting findings. "I know her death was ruled suicide, but the investigation was superficial. I know you had motive, means, and opportunity." Rami sat down heavily in one of the balcony chairs. He looked like he might faint. How did you?" "I'm studying forensic psychology, Baba. I know how to read patterns. I know what unresolved guilt looks like." Amira sat across from him. "And I know what mother is. I've known for years that she's capable of anything to protect family interests." Silence stretched between them. The sun continued rising, indifferent to their catastrophe. "Did you kill her?" Amira asked. "I need to hear you say it." Rami looked at his daughter, brilliant, perceptive, uncompromising, and felt the last pieces of his armor crumble. He'd carried this alone for 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days. The weight of it had been crushing him cell by cell. And now his daughter, the person he loved most in this world besides his dead sons, knew, or suspected, or had figured out enough that denial was pointless. "Yes." The word came out as a whisper. "I killed her. I murdered Maya Delgado. Your mother knew. She wanted it done. But I'm the one who did it. I'm the one who crushed pills into champagne and watched her die for 23 minutes. Amira's composure cracked. Tears started streaming down her face. "Baba, how could you?" She was going to publish an exposé. About our affair, about your mother's threats, about how wealthy men exploit foreign workers. Rami was crying too now, the dam finally breaking. It would have destroyed everything. Your future, your brother's futures. The humiliation, the scandal. I thought I was protecting you. So you murdered her? Amira's voice rose. A woman who loved you, who trusted you. You murdered her to avoid embarrassment. To protect my children. Rami's voice broke completely. I did it for you. For your brothers. So you wouldn't have to live with that shame. I'm living with worse shame now. Amira stood abruptly. My father is a murderer. My mother is an accessory. Our entire family is built on a dead woman's bones. How is that better? Rami had no answer. There was no answer. He'd made a choice that seemed inevitable at the time and impossible to justify in retrospect. He'd chosen wrong and a woman had died and nothing, no amount of guilt or suffering, would ever balance that equation. What are you going to do? Rami asked finally. Turn me in. Amira looked at her father, this broken, pathetic shell of a man, and faced her own impossible choice. She had evidence. She had Rose's testimony. She had enough to reopen the investigation, to potentially bring charges, to seek some form of justice for Maya Delgado. But she also had two younger brothers who didn't know any of this, who would be destroyed by the revelation that their father was a murderer, who would carry that trauma for the rest of their lives. I don't know, Amira said honestly. I don't know what to do. She walked back inside, leaving Rami alone on the balcony as the sun completed its rise over Dubai. Behind her, she could hear her father sobbing great, heaving sobs that sounded like a man dying from the inside out. In her room, Amira opened her laptop and looked at the compiled evidence. Everything she'd need to pursue justice for Maya. Everything that would also destroy her family completely. She thought about Maya Delgado, 28 years old, dreaming of a dance studio, believing in love, dying in a hotel room while a man she trusted held her hand and let her die. She thought about her brothers, innocent, unaware, about to start their final years of school. She thought about justice and family, and the impossible weight of moral choices when there are no good options. Amira's finger hovered over the delete button, then over the send button that would forward everything to Dubai police. The decision hung in the balance, suspended between justice and mercy, between truth and protection, between the dead woman who deserved vindication and the living people who would be collateral damage. In room 1847 of the Burj Tower Hotel, housekeeping was preparing for new guests. The sheets had been changed hundreds of times since that March night. The rose petals long since swept away. No trace remained of Maya Delgado's final moments except in the minds of the people who'd been complicit in her death. In Al Nada, Rosa Delgado prepared for another day of serving the family that had murdered her sister. She didn't have proof, but she knew. She'd always known. And she served coffee to Rami every morning, watching him flinch at her presence, understanding that his guilt was a prison he'd never escape. In London, Amira stared at her screen and tried to decide what justice looked like when achieving it would destroy everything else she loved. The weight of silence, it turned out, was measurable after all. It could be quantified in broken lives, destroyed dreams, and the impossible math of choosing who deserved to suffer for sins committed in the name of protection. Amira still hadn't made her decision when the sun completed its rise over Dubai. Another day beginning in the city of gold where secrets stayed buried and foreign workers remained disposable and powerful families controlled the narratives that determined whose lives mattered and whose deaths were just statistics. The story of Maya Delgado, dancer, dreamer, daughter, sister, murder victim, remained officially closed. Suicide. Case dismissed. Nothing to see here. But in the hearts of the people who knew the truth, her story was far from over. And in Amira's hands rested the power to finally give Maya's voice back, or to silence her forever in the name of protecting the guilty. The cursor blinked on the screen. Waiting.